Christ is risen. I want to begin this morning by telling you a story. 10 years ago, right at this time, I finished the Easter service here at Calvary and was scheduled to go on a study leave and to be away for several weeks to be able to pray, study, kind of prepare for the next year. And so I drove to New England where I was going to be spending time at a school in Massachusetts. And so drove out, spent maybe 2 or 3 weeks doing work. And then the plan was for Lisa and my 4 kids to join me. And so we met in New Hampshire. And so she drove out with our kids. We met at Lake Winnipesaukee and spent some time in New Hampshire. Had a beautiful, wonderful vacation, and we were just finishing that vacation. And on our way back to Massachusetts, the plan was we were going to go to Pepperell, Massachusetts, and visit a friend. And so because we both had cars out there, we were caravanning from New Hampshire to Pepperell. And I was in the front driving my Chevy Equinox, and Lisa was behind me with our 4 kids in the car. And we were driving towards Pepperell, and we got to a divided highway. We were not on the divided highway. We came to a T intersection at this divided highway. We were going to have to take the highway west. But this T intersection on the other side of the T part was a gas station. And I noticed that I needed gas. And so the plan I formulated was, okay, I'm going to go fill up with gas, and then we'll end up going west on this divided highway. Well, we're at a red light. I'm the first in line at the red light, and Lisa and our kids are behind us in that car. The light turns green, and because I'm just going to a gas station, I would kind of slowly pull across. I pass through the 2 westbound lanes on the divided highway. I pull past the grassy median in the middle, and I've entered into the eastbound lanes when all of a sudden a woman going about 55 miles an hour blows the red light, doesn't see it at all. I later learned that she was texting on her phone, and so doesn't even know that there's a light there. I think the only sign that there was a light was when her car rammed 55 miles an hour full speed into the front of my car. I'm pulling across the intersection, and so she hits the passenger side front wheel right at the engine. Now, I've got my eyes fixed on the gas station where I'm headed, and, the light's been green for a few seconds now, and I've only slowly made my way across, and so I have no concept that this is happening. And all of a sudden, she blows through this light, hits the front portion of my car, and at 55 miles an hour with no braking whatsoever, she essentially shears off the front of the car. So she smashes into the engine, shears off the front of the car, trying to get my bearings, what just happened. Amazingly, I hear a voice. Maybe in my soul, maybe in the car, I just hear a voice say, "You're okay. You're okay." Well, as only God would have it, there's an off-duty EMT getting gas at the gas station that I was headed for. He comes sprinting over, opens the driver's side door and says, "Don't move, you're injured." I said to him what I thought I just heard, which was, "I think I'm okay." He's like, "I saw the accident. You are not okay. You must be in shock." So meanwhile, Lisa and the 4 kids are right behind me, and they've watched all of this happen. So she pulls into the gas station, and she leaves 4 crying children in the car. She runs over also to check on me, and she and the off-duty EMT, he checks my neck. But there are no scratches, no soreness, nothing. And so the 3 of us conclude together, I think I'm okay. So I get out of the car. Lisa and I walk, we thank the EMT for his very kindness. Walk over to our other car, calm down our 4 kids, and I'm like, "I'm not dead, I'm alive." Well, the police are called because it's a bad accident. They show up, and during the kind of filling out reports, they notice the license plate on my car is from Michigan, and I've got luggage in the back. And so the policeman says, "What are you going to do? You drove all the way out here. You're obviously on a trip. What are you going to do without your car?" And I was like, "Well, that car over there is actually mine too." And so I pulled the luggage. He's like, what kind of person drives 2 cars out here? I pulled the luggage out of my Equinox and put it into our family's car. I signed the paperwork. My car was totaled. Signed the paperwork releasing the car to the authorities. I've never seen the car since. We drove off. The whole thing took about 40 minutes. And literally, yes, not a single scratch, no soreness, nothing. Well, as we're driving, you're sort of like, you're having a hard time coming to grips with what just happened. But at some point it dawns on me that the fear of death has passed. I'm not going to die. Whatever just happened, I did survive. I am okay. Like, I don't know. I somehow I made it. And I think to myself, man, if it wasn't for the Lord, if she had hit the passenger side door at 55 miles an hour, she was coming all the way through. The fact that she sheared off the front end of the car and knocked it off makes me realize, oh, Lord, have mercy. I'm alive because, Jesus, you protected me. But at some point, that fear passes. But if I'm honest, another fear started to arise. And it was a fear that kind of stuck with me for the next few days. And it was like, did I do something wrong? Is this punishment from God? Like, is this discipline for something in my life? There were fears about, okay, I'm alive, but the car is not. How are we going to replace it? Like, I don't think insurance is going to cover a replacement, and where would we get a car, and how would we afford that? And our budget is already pretty tight, and pretty soon it was no longer fear of death, it was fear, if you can say it this way, of life. If I had died in that moment, I don't have to worry about the car stuff. But having not died, I now had a lot of fears where well, what am I going to do? Well, in God's kindness, over the next few days, through prayer and conversation, and especially through his word, he told me that no, this wasn't punishment for sin. He wasn't angry with me, that he just had bigger plans of things that he was up to. In his kindness, he sort of made arrangements with somebody from the church who worked at a car dealership to help me pick out a new car, or a car that we were going to be able to use, a replacement car. The insurance did go through. We got a check for that. But then also the Lord prompted some people just out of his own kindness and generosity to provide some money to help as well. And then when we got done, there was a little bit left in a monthly payment, and it was just enough that kind of fit into our budget. And so we were able to get a replacement car, and we got through all of that. And I remember thinking, man, how kind of the Lord. Now, I say all of that to you because this Easter Sunday morning, there can be different fears we might be experiencing. There is, on one hand, the fear of death and dying. But there is also, on the other hand, the fear of life and living. And the good news of Easter Sunday morning is Jesus being alive addresses both the fear of death and dying that we might have this morning and the fear of life and living. So if you would you take a Bible? If you don't have one, there should be one in the rack in front of you that looks like this. And turn to Matthew chapter 28, which is page 811 in the church Bibles. Matthew chapter 28. Let me tell you what it is that we're turning to look at. Some of you are very familiar with the Bible, and so you'll understand this. Others of you may be new. You may just be visiting. Let me explain. On this day, 1991 years ago, we celebrated the first Easter of Jesus being raised from the dead. And we know what happened on this day, 1991 years ago, because we have 4 separate accounts of this day, meaning 4 different people in antiquity wrote down what happened on this day. 2 of those people were eyewitnesses, and 2 of those people were people who interviewed eyewitnesses, and each wrote a separate account to tell us about this day. What we're looking at in Matthew 28 is one of the eyewitness accounts. Matthew was there. He tells us what happened on that day, and it's written for us in Matthew 28. Let's look again. If you're not familiar, that big 2-8, that means chapter 28. And it's over on the right-hand column. We'll just begin reading with the first sentence there. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. Now, we kind of jumped into the middle of the story. There's a reason it's a 28, is because we're pretty far into the story. If we had read chapter 27, what we would have found out, chapter 27 tells us about Jesus' death, which took place 2 days ago, 1991 years ago. That's what we call Good Friday. And what we would have seen at the close of that day was Jesus crucified in the afternoon, is buried in the evening in a tomb. These two women, both named Mary, are there on that Friday. They themselves are eyewitnesses. They watch Jesus' body being taken down from the cross. They watch it being prepared for burial and then placed into a tomb. They're sitting right there. Then many people roll a stone in front of this tomb, because the opening to the tomb, it's cut out of a rock, to sort of guard and protect, to keep anybody from coming there. And then guards are placed in front of the tomb because this person who's put into the tomb, he's an important person. So Friday night, where we leave the scene is these two same women, both named Mary, are sitting there watching all of this. Well, night comes, they have to leave and go home. Saturday is the Sabbath, and so for observant Jews, they won't do anything on a Sabbath, and so nothing happens on Saturday. And then very early on this morning, 1991 years ago, those two women basically go back to where they left on Friday. If you've ever been through a traumatic event, if you've had something like this, sometimes it's just comforting to go back sort of to where you were, to try to process all that's happening. And so these two women go back to where they were on Friday night, and that's where our story starts. They're sitting there looking at this tomb with these guards being present. Well, something out of the ordinary happens while they're sitting there. Verse 2, there was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. Perhaps a little like getting blindsided in a car going through an intersection. These women have no idea that this is coming. And so what we have going on in verses 2 to 4 is what we might call the fear of death. I can only imagine they're there, and all of a sudden there is a violent earthquake. That itself has to be pretty scary. Everything is shaking, and then even beyond that, a non-human being comes down from the sky, and it describes him as looking like lightning. Can you imagine seeing lightning sitting there on a stone? He performs a superhuman feat, picks up this stone, moves it out of the way, and sits down on it. Now, Matthew makes the point, the guards that were there are so absolutely terrified. Now remember, these are soldiers. These are soldiers who have seen lots of stuff, but they've never seen anything like this. And in the midst of all of this, the earthquake and the non-human being who is shining like lightning, these guards get so scared that they essentially pass out. They become like dead men. And what Matthew is telling us is all around is the fear of death. These guards are sure they're going to die. The women think they're going to die. Everybody is scared. This is the end. Again, far worse, but a little like just getting broadsided or blindsided. You have no idea, and all of a sudden in the moment you realize, oh, this is the end. We're not making it out of this. And what we have here is fear. Terrifying fear, immobilizing fear. Fear of death and dying. Maybe for some of you here this morning, you know something about this fear. Probably not in these kinds of circumstances. But maybe you've recently got a diagnosis. And maybe it's a terminal diagnosis. Maybe it just simply has the word cancer in it, a horribly frightening diagnosis. Maybe you've come here this morning thinking about death. Maybe you're afraid, I don't know what will happen. And maybe you're the kind of person who's like, look, that just gives me anxiety. I don't even want to think about it. I just want to pretend I'm going to keep living and not even bother to think about it. The problem is whether it's a unexpected car accident, could be gun violence, you look around, you see war in the world, could just simply be old age, could be a heart attack. Death is coming, and maybe you've come here this morning with the fear of death. Well, I want you to notice the difference between the guards and the women. The guards have so much fear that they simply pass out. But to the women, listen to what happens, verse 5. The angel said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, he has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you. The reason why the angel says these words to these women is, number one, the men guards are passed out, so we can't really talk to them. But number two, far more important, these women have come to find Jesus. And because they've come to find Jesus, what they experience from this angel is far better than what I experienced on that day in Massachusetts. They not only hear, look, you're okay, don't be afraid. You're going to survive. They hear the additional good news that Jesus, who you're looking for, is alive. He's not. Now, they don't see Jesus at this point. Jesus is not in the tomb. The angel is there telling them, and he is bearing witness to the fact that Jesus has conquered death. And the reason why this is the message for all people who face the fear of death is what happened on this day, 1991 years ago, is the game changer. Because up until this point, every single person who had died stayed dead, and if they were somehow resuscitated, they ended up dying again. But with Jesus, the angel has come to announce that death has no power over Jesus and that he was raised from the dead. This is not a metaphor. This is not a story. This is not a thing to kind of make you feel good. Matthew says, look, I've seen him, and I'm here to testify to you today. Do you know who that voice was in the car? That was Jesus. That was not me. It certainly wasn't the EMT. We all thought I was in trouble. It was Jesus saying, you're okay. This is the good news on Easter Sunday, is that anybody who is looking for Jesus, anybody who follows Jesus, that's the difference between the women and the guards. The guards have no faith, they have no connection to Jesus, and so when death comes for them, they simply are like dead people and appear like they've died. The women have faith in Jesus. They've come to find Jesus. And the good news of Easter for you and I, if you and I are like the guards, when death comes, we're gonna simply die. If we're like the women, if we are seeking Jesus, following after Jesus, if we are disciples of Jesus, the good news of this Easter Sunday morning, 1991 years ago, is because Jesus is raised from the dead, never to die again, all who follow Jesus will have the exact same experience. Meaning that at some point, whether cremated or buried, we will be placed into the ground after death, but Jesus himself will raise us from the dead. The same power that brought this Jesus back to life will bring us back to life. This is the good news of Easter in the face of death. It doesn't take away the fear of dying. It doesn't take away the trouble that death causes. But ultimately, we can hear God say to us, don't be afraid of death. It has no power over you because of Jesus. Now, I said Easter was good news not only in relation to the fear of death, but also with regards to the fear of life. Keep going with me in the story because it's not done yet. Verse 8, so the women hurried away from the tomb, and what's the next word? Afraid, yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Now, I don't think this is the fear of death, because they've already had the fear of death, and the angel has shown up and said, you're not going to die, and good news, because Jesus is raised from the dead, death is not going to have any power over you today or ever. So I don't think this is the fear of death. What I think this is a little like what I experienced after that car accident, where you realize, okay, I didn't die. I'm alive. I'm okay. But then you start thinking, how am I going to pay for this? What's going to happen? How are we going to get through this? It doesn't say exactly what these women are afraid of, but I could imagine. If you're the first people to hear this news, you might be thinking, well, what if nobody believes us when we tell them? Or remember, Jesus was crucified by the authorities who were not happy with him. What's going to happen once they find out that he's not in this tomb anymore and that we were here? I'm sure these two women are wondering, how's this going to work? What in the world is going on? And I have to imagine what the fear they're experiencing now is not fear of death, but fear of life and fear of living. You see, they're filled with joy because Jesus is alive, but there's still fear about how do we make it? What's going to happen? What's this going to mean? What do we do? What's coming in the future? Notice the response, though, in verse 9. Suddenly, Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, and what are the first words Jesus says? Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me. See, the good news at Easter is not just that Jesus is alive, and it's not just that if we have faith in Jesus, we too will be made alive after death. That is really good news. But the problem is, you might think, man, Jesus died, God raised him from the dead, he's now ascended, he's in heaven, and he's having a great time, and he gets on with eternity, and we're stuck here. No, the good news of Easter also has something to do with us living life now, and the good news is Jesus is alive, and because of his death and resurrection, now pay close attention to this, because of his death and resurrection, he is now no longer confined to being in one place at a time, but because of his Spirit, he's now able to be present everywhere. What do these two women get in the midst of their fear of life? They get Jesus coming to be with them. You see, all they had before was an angel telling them the tomb is empty, which is fantastic news, but it's not nearly as good as news to realize not only is the tomb empty, but the person who was in that tomb is now here with you. The good news for me with this car accident is that this same Jesus is the one present saying, you're okay. And also the one who's there day after day going, we got to figure this thing out. We got to find a replacement car. We got to work with the dealer. We got to come up with the terms. We got to figure out where the money is. The good news of Easter is that Jesus is alive, so you and I don't have to fear death. But also the good news of Easter is that Jesus is alive, so we don't have to fear life. He died the way he died so that he could free us from death and walk with us through life. So some of us may be here this morning, not so much afraid of death and dying, but afraid of life and living. And maybe you're here thinking, man, what am I going to do with this inflation stuff? Everything keeps getting more expensive. Maybe you're worried about losing your job. Maybe you struggle generally with anxiety and you're like, I don't even know where this fear is coming from. Maybe you're worried about being embarrassed at school. Maybe you're worried about failing out school. Maybe you're worried about, hey, today I'm about to go see some family members after service, and I'm not sure this is going to go very well. Maybe you're worried about your marriage falling apart. Maybe you're worried about loneliness and thinking, I can't handle another night being alone by myself. Whatever your fear is today, the good news of Easter is that Jesus is alive, and not just off in heaven partying, having a great time, that he is present with us today, that he wants to walk with us and guide us. You heard it in the baptism testimonies. He wants to rescue us from sin. He wants to be present with us. He wants to go through the trials and difficulties of life. That's the good news of Easter. And so I want to leave you this morning with a pretty simple question. What are you afraid of today? Is it more on the side of death and dying? Have you realized death is coming? It might be a heart attack. It might be a car accident. It might be gun violence. It could be war. It could be old age. It could be cancer. Death is coming. If those are your fears at all today, you can either be like the guards who've got nothing to do in the face of death and so essentially collapse out of fear. Or you can be like these women who are like, we are here to follow Jesus. And if you are a follower of Jesus, if you came here this morning looking for Jesus, I've got good news for you. This story is not a made-up story. This is a true story. This angel told those women told some other people, those people told other people, all the way somebody told me. I believed, and I'm here telling you. We have an eyewitness account. I'm adding my own account to that to say, I was in a car. There was no way I even knew what was coming. I should have died, and I heard a voice saying, you're okay. These are testimonies of people saying, this Jesus is alive. And if you came here this morning with the fear of death, if you're willing to accept that he's been raised from the dead, you will have nothing to fear when death comes. Jesus will raise you as well. Second option for my question is, are you here this morning fearing life? Is it more about anxiety? Is it more about stress? Is it more about worries about the future? The good news of Easter is that if you're looking for Jesus, he wants to walk with you through all the things of life. I hope you heard it in those baptism testimonies. There is nothing you could ever do that would make him love you less. And the grace and blessing of Easter is that Jesus went through what he went through so that he could be with you and be with me. You know, on Easter we say, Christ is risen, to which we reply, he is risen indeed. Reading this story this morning, I'd like to add, just for today, a little phrase at the end. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Because whatever your fear is, whether it's of death and dying or life and living, Jesus is the answer. So Christ is risen. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Let's pray together. Jesus, we praise you for life. We praise you that on this day you were raised from the dead for our sake, that you did all of this for us. Lord, we sang earlier, name another person who would ever do anything like this. And so God, for my brothers and sisters who have come here this morning, who might be listening online or engaged in some other way, Lord, if they are facing today the fear of death, would you tell them, Jesus, that if they come looking for you, they will overcome death too. And Lord, if they are fearing life, I pray that you would tell them this morning that all they have to do is let you walk with them through life. And God, whether it's fear of death or fear of life, we praise you, Jesus, that you are with us. Help us not to be afraid. Amen.